and strength, right? We owned land, we owned an empire. We had, in fact, multiple empires going at the same time. And this is a bit of a wake-up call for Muslims who talk about the revival of the caliphate, the khilafah. We had an Abbasid and an Umayyad and then the Mughal and the Ottoman or Uthmani dynasties operating sometimes at exactly the same time. But the point is, the vast stretch of God's earth was being presided over, ruled over by Muslims. And this has happened for a large chunk of our history. If the Quran was calling for what some crazy people today insist it calls for, both in the Muslim as well as the non-Muslim camp, you have right-wing extremists who are Muslim, right, and they want to go and blow up any non-Muslim and find something that justifies. I work in the prisons. We have a lot of guys who have a background of criminality, and they've come to prison for doing drugs or for robbing and mugging some poor soul. And then suddenly they find religion. And often it's like purely by the sheerest of coincidence, they find a very anti-establishment form of Islam that they latch onto. Now, why do you think that is? Because the whole of his background has been one that's anti-authority, anti-establishment, anti-police, always on the wrong side of the law. And so it's really convenient if you find a religion which allows you to effectively be the same person you were, except now you grow a beard and you wear a thobe instead of wearing your trousers halfway down your bottom. You know, you've changed your gear a bit, and instead of spitting sort of curses and you're saying Subhanallah, mashallah, akhi, kuffar, Allahu Akbar, right? That's what you've changed, but actually you're still the same person. You're an aggressive person, you're anti-establishment, you hate the system, and so you make your own mind up and say, you know what, these kuffar, we don't have to respect their laws, they're man-made laws anyway, so it's okay if I rob a bank, if I do a bit of drugs, we're going to support the mujahideen somewhere, Allahu Akbar, right? It's extreme, it's mentalness. And it's easy, if somebody wants to do that, they open the Quran, they say, look, I found a surah, it says fight them, they're all kuffar, they're terrible people. And because we are bound, like I said to you, every single prayer we are forced to say, guide us along the straight path, the path of those that you have blessed. Acknowledging that it's really very easy, it's very, very possible to be off the right path by turning away from or turning a blind eye to the example of people who walk the path before us. We have to define our law based on the example of the Prophet and his companions. That is fundamental. And, you know, so where that, if we, in isolation to that, if we do that, we're doing ourselves a disservice. I mean, yeah, maybe an extremist who's a Muslim, or someone who's extreme in their animosity to Islam. It's useful for both. And I sometimes think to myself, the EDL and the, Omar Bakri, Al-Muhajirun, Imam Chowdhury, no relation, of course, right? Well, he's a Muslim. He's a human being. He's from South Asia in his ethnic origins. But apart from those few things, they're two sides of the same coin. The EDL and Al-Muhajirun, the guys who are burning flags and, and celebrating the people who were allegedly, masterminded the 9/11, 7/7, and also there are people who celebrate this. They call them the magnificent, I don't know however many they were now, 17 or whatever, who were responsible apparently for 9/11. And I say apparently because, full disclosure. But people who celebrate that, and they call themselves Muslim, and people who decide that this single act of violence defines Muslims and they're right-wing anti-Muslims. Really, they're doing the very same thing. They've decided violence defines Islam. The extremist Muslim has decided violence defines Islam, and the very right-wing anti-Muslim has decided violence declares Islam. And in that sense, they'd get on really well, I think, if they were both turned up at the same party. And that might not be a bad idea. But if we're interested in having a serious and a genuine, like you really want to actually find out for yourself. You can't divorce the text from its context. You can't divorce the scripture from its history. And it is firmly rooted in a history. And that's an important reference point. So any number of verses, and it could take a long time to do that, and it's a journey that I welcome and encourage you to undertake. And not just you, but anybody else, everybody else. We should undertake this journey and try to find out exactly what was meant. But do it to learn what did the first community make of it. Because they established some pretty unique things. The very first time in the history of the world, this is a historic fact, the very first time in the history of this earth that Muslim, Jewish and Christian communities work together in mutual cooperation and achieve something great is in Muslim Spain. It's called the conviviencia, the living and let living, where scholars who are Christian, Muslim and Jewish work together in translating texts of medicine, of philosophy, of astronomy, of mathematics. And this paved the way to what we then called Enlightenment Europe, the Renaissance, all of these great things. We are where we are today because Christians, Muslims and Jews worked together and achieved an amazing thing once upon a time. And it happened. It couldn't happen historically. Today it can. Times change and God tells us, you know what? I'm not interested. Don't think because you call yourself Muslim that I'm always going to take your side. No. It's not about the names or the labels. It's about what we present. And this is why I made the point of mentioning if there's injustice, doesn't matter how righteous you think you are, God's not going to help you. Well, there was a time when Muslims were the only people who were able to create a society where Christian, Jew, Muslim, various sects of Christianity or denominations of Christianity and of Judaism could work together. The chief physician for the Abbasid head of state was Maimonides, Maimun, who is a great towering figure in Judaism and in medieval European intellectual history, Maimonides. He was a physician, he's a philosopher, and he wrote all of his works, this Jewish scholar, in Arabic. And that happened at that time. And it had never happened before this point. And before that and after that, for a considerable number of centuries, Christianity was not yet mature enough to be able to tolerate those that it disagreed with within itself. And we saw the bloody and very violent Protestant and Catholic fighting and falling out. And we saw that the heresies that people were able to be accused of throughout when the rest of the world. So the point is, a time existed when these things, there was a time when these things existed. And today, the reality is that you can't live in a Muslim country and be safe, oftentimes, and you can enjoy great safety in this world, in the Western world. And that's because God doesn't take sides. It's because if we've forgotten what justice means, then justice will remain somewhere. And the extent that there's justice, we owe it to justice to recognize it. A Muslim country where everyone's very pious looking, but women aren't given any of their rights and men are forced into certain ways, that is not a fair society, and it won't flourish. As a Muslim, we're able to live and practice our faith in many ways here in the West than we are in the Muslim world, and that's the reality of today's times. Any other last points? We're all desperate to get home, really, aren't we? Thank you very much for joining me this evening and for being such wonderful hosts, and maybe in another few years. Thank you. Take care.